On a dark night in December, a passenger plane just disappeared. This is the story of Aerosvit Flight 241, and it's a story about how a series of small, almost unbelievable errors, all compounded by a critical language barrier, could lead to absolute catastrophe.
So, let's get right into it. The date is December 17th, 1997. A plane full of people, many heading to Greece for the Christmas holidays, is on its final approach. But they never make it to the runway.
70 souls on board, 62 passengers, 8 crew members. And when the wreckage was finally located 3 days later, high up in the mountains and buried in snow, there were no survivors. Now, you might think the trouble started during that final fateful approach. But the truth is, the chain of events that doomed this flight began long before it ever left the ground. Right off the bat, there was a problem. The plane they were supposed to be flying, a Boeing 737, had engine trouble. So, at the last minute, they swapped it for a different plane, a Yakovlev Yak-42. And that single decision introduced 2 huge problems: an unfamiliar aircraft for this route and a hidden, dangerous flaw. And here is that flaw, the very first hole in what we call the Swiss cheese model of safety. The captain's main navigation instrument, his VOR receiver, which is what helps a pilot navigate using ground-based radio signals, it was broken. Plain and simple. That meant the plane was technically not airworthy for this kind of flight. To make matters so much worse, nobody in the cockpit had ever flown into Thessaloniki before. Think about that. They were flying a partially blind aircraft into an unfamiliar mountainous region at night. So the crew was already starting with a massive disadvantage. Now, let's watch what happens on their first approach, because this is where a simple misunderstanding starts to snowball. As they were getting close, air traffic control was talking to another plane, an Olympic Airways flight, giving them instructions to descend. Well, the crew of Flight 241 overheard that message, and they thought it was for them. They started descending based on instructions meant for a completely different aircraft. And because of that mix-up, they came in way too high, way too fast. There was no way they could land, so they had to abort, hitting the power and performing a go-around, climbing back up into the total darkness to try again, with those unseen mountains all around them. This is where the situation goes from bad to irreversible. The crew is now disoriented, they're wrestling with broken equipment, and a fundamental breakdown in communication, really a language barrier, is about to seal their fate. I mean, look at this. It perfectly captures how lost they were. Air traffic control tells them turn right to get them back on course for the runway. And what do? They turn left, the exact opposite direction, flying away from the airport and straight towards the mountains. The cockpit voice recorder tells a terrifying story of confusion. The captain's main navigation tool is out, remember. So they're arguing. They're literally debating which instruments to trust. They were completely lost and arguing over which broken compass to follow. And here's the absolute heart of the tragedy. While the crew is flying towards a mountain, they keep telling ATC that everything's fine, that they're on the right track. They ask for help from radar, but this airport didn't have any. The official report found that both the pilots and the air traffic controller had, quote, insufficient proficiency in English. They knew the standard phrases, but they couldn't break out of that script. The crew couldn't properly explain just how lost they were, and the controller couldn't ask the non-standard questions to figure it out. They were talking, but they weren't communicating. So they're dangerously off course, flying blind, and headed right for high terrain. And at this point, the airplane's own safety systems start to scream at them. The ground proximity warning system, that's the automated voice that yells, terrain, pull up. It went off not once, but 4 separate times. The crew was so fixated on their navigation problem, so deep in that rabbit hole of confusion, that they just ignored the first 3 alarms. Only after the 4th and final warning did they finally pull up, but by then, it was far too late. This was it, their last message. Chillingly routine. Just moments after saying this, the plane slammed into the Piria Mountains at over 3,000 feet, and everyone was killed instantly. So how on earth does this happen? Well, the investigation showed that it wasn't one single thing that went wrong. It was a whole chain of failures, a perfect storm of errors that aviation experts call the Swiss cheese model. Just look at this. Every layer of safety had a hole in it. You start with broken equipment. Then you have a crew that gets lost and confused. Then you throw in a language barrier so no one can communicate the real problem. Then, total breakdown of teamwork in the cockpit. On the ground, no radar to help them out. And it all starts with the airline itself, which sent a plane that shouldn't have been flying in the first place. On that night, all of those holes lined up perfectly, creating a straight path to disaster. So, you might be wondering why an accident from decades ago still matters so much. Well, it's because the lessons learned from those snowy mountains fundamentally changed how pilots are trained to this day. This crash became a textbook example of why we need something called cockpit resource management, or CRM. It's not just about knowing how to fly the plane. It's about how the crew works as a team, how they communicate clearly, challenge each other's assumptions, and make decisions under pressure, to prevent exactly the kind of tunnel vision that doomed Flight 241. And the lessons are just so stark. Clear communication, especially when you're dealing with different languages, isn't some soft skill. It is a life or death tool. Everyone needs to be on the same page. And it's a powerful reminder that while technology is great, it can and will fail. Ultimately, your training and procedures are what save you. But the biggest takeaway? A chain of small, seemingly minor errors can add up to be just as deadly as any massive single failure. And that leaves us with a question that goes way beyond aviation, doesn't it? It makes you stop and think about the complex systems in our own lives and wonder what small, unnoticed holes in our own safety nets might be lining up right now.